Hello, today is Monday, September 22nd. Welcome to episode 504 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debate shaking up America. I'm NSI Advisory Board member Lester Munson. I'm joined today by founder and executive director Jamil Jaffer, senior fellow Andy Kaiser, and fellow Jessica Jones. Today we're going to talk about, again, Russian incursions over NATO countries. On Friday, 3 Russian MiG fighter aircraft flew over Estonia for several minutes. This is seen as one of the more provocative things Russia has done in recent memory. Notably, not the first time they violated Estonian airspace. This does happen on occasion, but this was 3 planes for several minutes, very blatant. Of course, the Russians denied having done anything and accused Estonia of provoking them. Notably, Notably, NATO aircraft from Italy, Sweden, and Finland responded to the incursion. This comes on top of Russian drones flying over Polish airspace where they were shot down, and a Russian drone flying over Romanian airspace in the last couple of weeks. So, in the midst of all of this diplomatic effort, particularly from the Trump administration, to settle the Ukraine war, Russia has responded by massively increasing its attacks on Ukraine and flying weapon systems over NATO countries. So clearly, Vladimir Putin is giving a certain finger to the American president. The president of Poland has notably said, we need to respond in force. We need to take action militarily to respond to this, implying that the only thing Russia really understands is a punch in the face, which some of us have said previously. He said he would only advise this action, and Poland would only take this action if all NATO countries are supportive of the action. It is a veiled reference to the U.S. government and the Trump administration and President Trump. So the question here is, Andy Kaiser, welcome to the podcast. How should the United States respond? How will the United States respond to this the situation which has really ratcheted up the stress between NATO and Russia?
Yeah, I'm not sure the Trump administration will match the Europeans' concern on this with regard to what action they take. I think they probably don't want to disrupt their ongoing conversations. Maybe we'll get something on Truth Social, sort of a disjointed statement that sort of slaps Putin on one hand and maybe praises him on the other. That seems to be par for the course. But we have, we're getting awfully close to an Article 5 situation here. We're certainly in Article 4 territory for the second time in just a week, where a head of state has formally called for NATO to discuss such a serious incident.
Jones, what are your thoughts about this? Do you expect a Truth Social post from the president? Perhaps he could act as if the Truth Social is an accidental direct message to Putin.
I mean, he was asked, and he did say, oh, that's not good. So, I mean, that might be actually the official statement on this incident. I think there's not much difference for the administration when it comes to Poland, Romania, and Estonia. Adding Estonia to the incursion list, it does not change the calculation on part of the White House. I don't think President Trump really cares about Estonia and what's happening over there. So I don't think we're going to see a change in any, decision making coming out of the White House. I will say, Andy brought up the Article 4 consultations. You have the Czech president actually saying that they should start shooting down Russian aircraft, which would, of course, be a major escalation. But I think the calculus on a lot of European leaders is, what would the Trump administration do with that? He's obviously already said Zelensky has started the war with Russia. So I think, they're weighing whether any kind of ratcheting up on their part would actually be the Trump, opening the door for the Trump administration to blame these European nations if there were to, an escalation in the conflict.
Jamil Jaffer, when China flew a surveillance balloon over the United States, even the Biden administration shot it down.
I mean, it took them a while to get there. It took them a few days. It floated over half the United States.
But they didn't.
They didn't do it until it was
Joe Biden shot down enemy aircraft over the United States. What will President Trump do about this?
Okay, I think there's a big difference between a Chinese spy balloon in the waters off the U.S., right, versus 3 Russian MiG-31 fighters. But that's exactly the point, right? It's one thing to send drones over Poland. It's another thing to send drones over Romania. It's a third and entirely different thing to send, presumably armed MiG-31s. Maybe they weren't armed at all. Presumably armed MiG-31s into the waters of Estonia, right? I mean, that's a big deal. 12 minutes is not a short period of time for a fighter jet. That's a long distance they can travel in 12 minutes. So, and having a NATO F-35 scrambled to respond to this, the Italians, the Finns, the Swedes, I mean, this is a big deal. The Poles are now saying they're operating at maximum readiness. They have their radar defenses up. They have scrambled, sort of a two-man air patrol, a two fighter jet air patrol up constantly, the same way we did during the Cold War, where we had our nuclear bombers aloft in case there was an attack. So the Europeans and our NATO partners are definitely treating this like it's a big deal. The president, to be fair to for his part, and I don't think it's fair to say the president doesn't care about Estonia, Jess. Look, I think the president last week, after the incursions into Romania and Poland, did say to the Europeans that he was prepared to impose massive sanctions, additional sanctions, oil sanctions on Russia, and tariffs on China if the Europeans were willing to go along with it and stop buying oil. Now, they only buy a tiny percentage of oil, so I do think the president is ready, but only to do it on the economic front. And I think, to everybody's point, the right answer and the only answer the Russians will really understand is a military response. And so while I'm not prepared today to say the U.S. needs to go shoot down Russian fighter jets or NATO should shoot down Russian fighter jets, I do think that the right military response is for the president to unwind where he's been on Ukraine, to triple down on Ukraine, give them all the weapons, and give them more U.S.-directed support directly, and free them out to use them completely against Russia, and allow them to take the fight to the Russians. That's the best military response that I think we can see right now. I think shooting down Russian fighter jets would be very dangerous, although it may come to that. I don't think we're there yet.
Jamil, it seems to me like you're describing the Biden administration policy. Let's give a lot of weapons to the Ukrainians and let them do the work.
That would be funny if I were, but the Biden administration policy was too weak to start. They did eventually provide some significant amount of weapons to Ukraine, but it was too long, took forever, and they restricted their use of them completely. What the president ought to do is to quadruple down, send them a ton more weapons, right? Allow them to use them in any way they want, really allow them to take the fight to the Russians aggressively. That, I think, and frankly, free our European partners to do the same. I think that will actually allow the Ukrainians to fight harder and take Russian lives on the battlefield, which we're not willing to do as NATO. And there you go. Like, why not empower people who want to fight the Russians, who are fighting the Russians in their own territory, to do what they want to do? It seems crazy to pull back when Russia's threatening NATO directly.
All right, my real response to you is I think that's a distinction without much of a difference. The Ukrainians are already sending a lot of weapons into Russia. They already have a ton of hardware from us and from European allies, and it's not making a difference. Russia is escalating. I agree with the Czechs and the Poles. The time is to punch Putin in the face and start shooting stuff down when they send it over NATO countries.
So I just want to be clear, your position, last week, you didn't think we should hit drug traffickers off the coast of the U.S., bringing drugs into the U.S. Now you're saying the NATO, supported by the U.S., should shoot down manned Russian MiGs.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
That's exactly right. Folks, the time for action is now. The bear only understands violence, and they are clearly going to just keep escalating this thing until we decide to take action. Okay, that's a wrap. Thanks as always to Kelly Crowley, Taylor Lane, Claude Jennings, and the NSI staff for their help in producing today's episode. Join us on Wednesday, September 24, for another episode of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you smart fast on the national security and foreign policy debate shaking up America. We're on YouTube. Check out our channel there for an amazing video of today's episode. If you like what you heard or saw, please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe.